Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Wednesday in the break room. I'm your host, Kevin Wade, and I'm the host because I've got the nicest microphone. And I've got with me two colleagues, two compatriots, two wonderful human beings. First up, he turned on his video first, so he gets introduced first. He's got a beard. He's got several corgis. He's Eric Mayhall.
Hello, back again. Love
And
that
then
introduction.
second co-host of the trio. He's also got a beard. He's jumped the gun on cardigan weather. It kind of looks like he's wearing a bathrobe. It's Trace Thomas, everybody.
Hello, good afternoon.
Y'all can take issue with those intros after the broadcast. So if you have not stopped by the break room before, this is a place where we jump on every Wednesday. We are live streamed on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, and post-produced on Anchor, which means we are on all of your podcast platforms. And this is a place where we come on and we just share our thoughts from an agency perspective on just what's going on in the world. We have a lot of these kind of conversations internally, and we always think they're really interesting. So we thought, hey, some other people might also want to talk with us. That might be fun, right? So we hope you're joining us on one of those platforms. And today, I think we're going to start with an article that Trace brought us. We talked a few weeks ago on the break room about Google, about general monopolies, privacy, the changes that Google's making, the changes that are coming specifically to its ad platform, and really its whole suite of services that are kind of creating new, interesting ways for businesses and ad agencies like us to advertise. And Facebook apparently takes issue with that, doesn't it, Trace?
Yeah, so this article, it basically says that they're having issues with Apple's all their different ad changes and stuff, and I found the whole thing kind of interesting. My big takeaway from it that I thought was most interesting was that Facebook actually revealed during this as well that they were inadvertently underreporting their web conversions.
Inadvertently.
Yeah, but I would think you would want to be reporting those. Like you'd want to push those numbers up, right? So I don't really I guess they said they were doing it on accident, and I can't believe them because I just like, I don't know why you wouldn't want to be like, look at all these conversions we're giving your company.
But so what was the go on, Eric.
I was gonna say, I think the biggest interesting thing from this is like, we didn't expect these tech giants to actually start publicly calling each other out as these kind of things start to change. And now that Facebook is experiencing lack of growth, they're still growing, but they didn't grow at the same rate that they have been. They're trying to pivot, and instead of looking at a lot of other writing on the wall there that's like, okay, it's an echo chamber, it's getting kind of toxic, there's other issues in the Facebook ecosystem that's hurting its growth. They're saying it's actually Apple's ad changes screwing our ability to advertise and track conversions properly, and that's scaring advertisers off.
Oh yeah,
so
and
it's funny,
Yeah, to correct myself, I introduced this as Facebook taking issue with Google, who also had a lot of changes come down the pipe recently. But this article specifically is Apple focused. Google is kind of the contextual vessel by which we've been discussing a lot of analytics and changes to the ad platforms and analytics. But Apple is the one that, and it's funny because these are like the three tech giants we're always talking about, right? So this specifically is Facebook is taking issue with Apple's tracking changes. And of course, this is the back and forth we have, right? So it says that Facebook is saying that Apple's tracking changes aren't about privacy, but rather about asserting dominance. And Apple says that its changes are supposed to be improving the experience for consumers. And yeah, it is interesting that that Facebook would openly call Apple out for that, since they're also under scrutiny for like that exact thing.
I just think what it comes down to is, Apple took a really, really aggressive step, and it was absolutely not just, for the good of humanity and everybody's privacy, but Apple saw strategic opportunity within the market. They saw that this was a growing concern that a lot of people had, and they said, okay, we're going to implement this as just a standard across our user, experiences that enhanced privacy, whether you're on a Safari browser or even a MacBook or a iPhone. So it's like everybody has one of those. Everybody uses one of those at least. So I have to imagine that they did that because they're like, okay, it'll bring more people to us. But it is having these ripple effects now where we're seeing, oh, all of a sudden Facebook can't track conversions because Safari doesn't give them the information on who's browsing from what and what the acquisition sources were. So it's disrupting so much, it's making everybody kind of start to point fingers. But if I had to say one thing in this whole debate is I trust Facebook the absolute least. I think they've time and time again demonstrated that they will take the money and lie to the public to make themselves look better, and kind of get away with what they want to do to expand their brand.
Yeah. Well, because Facebook is the most niche of these three. Like if we talk about Google basically owning information on one hand, right? And we talked about this again a few weeks ago, where it's like it is in Google's best interest to at least be semi-transparent, and because ultimately it only succeeds if it delivers the most accurate information to searchers, right? Like that's the entire point, whether you're doing ads or organic search or any of the Google platforms. Google kind of, to some extent, has placed a little bit of self-accountability there because their product only works if they're accountable to their customers. And then Apple, kind of in the same way, like if they want to continue to be the device that is in everybody's homes, some stupid average of like multiple times per household, that they need to also kind of police themselves a little bit. And that's why Apple and Google are the two that have come out recently with increased privacy structures. And now Facebook, as you're right, kind of like the devious younger brother, who like that they're kind of this segmented, even though they do kind of fall under that giant tech monopoly, they are a very kind of niche thing, right? Like if Apple went away, I feel like if Apple or Google went away, society as we know it would cease to exist. If Facebook went away, I don't think that would be the case. So Facebook has to kind of scrap and claw and get a little bit hurt when
the big difference is with Facebook is their entire business model is structured around the data of their users. Where they're making profits coming directly from the advertising and their ability to sell the data of its users. And other companies like Google does not have that same issue. They use Google, they use a lot of data to sell to advertisers, but it's exactly, they collect it, but it's more than that. They have a lot of other services that aren't data reliant, but it is a piece of the pie. Apple's the same way. They have users, that's part of how they make their profits, but the vast majority is retail and wholesale, tech production. So when you look at Facebook, though, without the data, without the people willingly giving them information, they have nothing. So at the end of the day, they're always going to be the ones who are trying to push for a little less privacy control, a little more of an ability to kind of take advantage of different situations to continue to scrape that data so that they have a product to sell to keep them open. And they're trying to get people to stay on the platform more by making features more enticing or adding new functionalities like shops. The more time you can spend on Facebook, the more data points that they can get on you to sell, to actually make money and stay profitable as a company.
Well, I think too, like Apple and Google are seeing the writings of the wall because there's been all these different hearings with these tech companies, and they're seeing that basically if they don't start self-regulating, the regulation's going to be forced on them. And if you look at like media companies, the film industry, everything like that, they're all self-regulated because they know we'd rather regulate ourselves than have, the government step in and tell us how we need to be doing this thing. So, all those rating systems for movies and TV and all that, that's all self-done. And so by the industry, and it's all doing just so they can have control and be able to say like, oh, we want to make violent movies still be able to be PG-13 because we want kids to be able to watch them, you know, things like that. So they're just, now these tech companies are like, okay, this is going to start, like someone's about to force our hand, so we might as well get the jump on this and make sure we're the ones, you know, leading where we want this to go.
Which is like that. That's a really good, like, strong case for, like, you know, free market and capitalism and self-regulation. Like, it's a good example of that, is that when given, you know, when put up against the pressures of, like, the people as a whole, a lot of these groups will self-regulate themselves, and it looks different for everyone. But you said, like, you know, like the Motion Picture Association of America, like, that's all a self-imposed, like, regulations and rating systems. And so Google and Apple are doing that a little bit. And whether it's because they truly believe that they should ethically, or whether they're being pushed to it by the population as a whole, it's still a great system of, like, I like seeing that system work, at least.
Well, not to get political, but I would say I agree with that. Like, they're still doing it, like you said, self-preservation, but they're only doing it to prevent the rate. Like, if there was no threat of regulation, then it would just be Wild West.
But I was
going to
say,
a
I
threat
think
of regulation. Like, it's still the people as a whole, and kind of other external forces are creating that threat, and it's allowing them to respond to it on their own. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's showing that companies are more scared of the government and the inefficiency of government regulation than anything. It is the one thing that'll stop capitalism in its tracks and say, you know what, instead of making more money and just be in the Wild West, we're going to take this back just so the government doesn't get involved. It's
the inefficiency of the government is creating efficiency in the private sector out of sheer fear.
Yeah. Wow, this got real intense economically. That's funny, but it is interesting, you know, what we've been talking about here with how a company can change so much over time. You know, you look at Facebook, which was initially created obviously as like a college project, and then that expanded, you know, outwards, and it kind of started as a social network between different colleges, and now it's shifted from this beast of kind of working with universities to create social platforms to selling data and like high powered sales of advertising platform pieces. And it's just kind of weird to say, okay, like, when did this shift take place? You know, what happened to make kind of where this brand was heading and take it a 180 to be the innovators that would then create, you know, what social media is synonymous with? Big question. I know. I mean, like,
I don't. Oh gosh. I mean, that kind of, I don't know. I think that Facebook has always been able to look ahead a little bit and at least guess where things are going. Or, you know, honestly, sometimes they just see another company, another startup that's succeeding, and they take the chance on buying it. I mean, for every Instagram that they buy, they've probably bought 20 other smaller companies that haven't turned into, you know, what Instagram did. And it seems like they're kind of more in the acquisition game because they kind of have to be, right. Like, again, they have to create this relevance for themselves, whereas like Apple and Google, as long as they keep doing what they're doing, they're going to remain relevant. I mean, to an extent. Like, it's kind of harder for Facebook. So yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with their model of like purchasing and like fostering these smaller platforms and kind of looping them into the overall Facebook brand. That's been a big part of their brand for the last decade. It's kept them relevant.
They even tried to go into, like, you know, the hardware. They tried to make a Facebook phone, and it just failed. Like, no one wanted a Facebook phone. So it's not like, even beyond just company, like, you know, the digital, they've tried to do other things. And I don't know. I mean, I was never interested in it, but I don't know why it failed. Whereas, like, you know, then Google decides to make the Chromebook, and that, for some reason, that's been very successful. I think.
And the Google phones have been great too. Yeah.
Somehow Google
the Pixels,
in like every school, it seems. So I don't. I think that's helped. But, you know, again, yeah, they have the Pixel phone. So, but for some reason, Facebook, even when they try to do anything besides acquire other, you know, smaller companies to grow and things, they just seem to not be able to get past that certain barrier.
Because it's kind of what I was saying earlier. They're a little more niche than the other two. Like, the other two can put their hands into other areas, and people don't get as confused as like when Facebook makes a phone, right? But I mean, and I've heard like one of the latest things I heard, which in the same way that like TikTok got huge and then all of a sudden, Instagram has their reels, Facebook's trying to do it again. Clubhouse, the audio first social media that y'all listening may or may not have heard about, is kind of I think it's still in kind of invite only beta, but the idea is that it's an audio first platform where you join rooms of people having conversations. And basically, if you host
an
a
80s
room,
chat line on the internet.
exactly. And Gen Z's freaking out about it. They're like, wait a minute, this is the best idea ever. I'm like, guys, we're just recycling ideas on new platforms. But anyway, that's a totally different conversation.
Right.
But Facebook is going to try and do the same thing. So the rumor goes that Facebook is trying to develop their own Clubhouse the same way that they tried to develop their own TikTok to like moderate success, right? Like I wouldn't say that Reels have been like a flop, but it's still not TikTok. And so
no, but they did, they've done that forever, and it's why they're in a lot of trouble with the EFTC, because they keep doing the anti competition kind of practices of attempting to buy Snapchat saying no, and they're like, all right, whatever, we'll just make the exact same thing, and put that functionality into our platform. And like you said, varying levels of success with it overall, but it still is just like a really, really interesting concept to see how they eventually at some point became an acquisition machine, where it was like they tried their different approaches here and there, and then they said, okay, they almost became like a Shark Tank, like where they would kind of go out and see what up and coming companies are making ideas that they think are inspiring, and then they would just zoom in on things that they thought had potential and snatch it up and kind of put it into an incubator and see if they can't make it part of the brand. Like Instagram and WhatsApp are obviously their golden children, but that change to what they are now, it's like, what do you think? Does it help how technology and social media and kind of like how these platforms are advancing? Does it help getting the technology out there? Or do you think it hurts by all being funneled through just Facebook?
I'm sure Facebook would say that it helps because it's all under one cohesive brand and they're able to, but then you have Google, on the other hand, has been a little bit more open about not necessarily looking to acquire every startup they come across, but looking to support it for maybe an ownership stake or maybe supportive. So like Podium's a great example. Podium is the text platform for like online reviews and like online lead generation. So you go to someone's website, you click on the link, and instead of live chatting on the website, it just sends a text to you and you continue the conversation there. Like really cool for like service-based industries that are bringing in lots of calls and lots of leads and they need to be able to respond quickly. Google saw that and went, hey, that's really cool. We'll invest $34 million into it. But they invested in it. They didn't just buy them right out. They didn't just buy them out. They invested in it and they said, yeah, have $34 million. Now make it even better. And so it's interesting. And like Google's really open and Podium's really open about Google doing that. And so it's a very open conversation about that relationship, whereas Facebook it's that they don't hide the fact that they are trying to buy all these different things. So I think I personally view good, like just with those two things, like I get a more warm fuzzy feeling about hearing Google invest into a startup and not buying it outright than I do hearing Facebook trying to buy a bajillion and a half tech startups and bring them all under the Facebook grouping. So I think it kind of hurts more than it helps to do what Facebook does, but I don't know. That's just kind of based off of a few different things that I know about.
What do you think, Trace?
Well, the cool thing about the Google and Podium, like I didn't really think about it I didn't realize that they had invested that money. But it also, like, not only are they investing money into the company, but it's also like a company that still benefits Google just by user experience, because they're going in and leaving. It connects you to that client's Google profile, so they can go leave Google ratings and stuff. So
If your system allows you to
pretty
leave
smart.
a Google review and Google sees, oh, hey, just by this platform existing, we are going to get benefit from it. Yeah, it makes total
sense. And the
sense.
review, Google's been very good, even if it is a contained ecosystem, of giving people access to their various API codes, whether it is, Google Maps, which I think everybody know that there was a wave of all of a sudden all the Google Maps on websites just stopped working at one point. And I'm sure a lot of people remember when that happened, and that's when they started to require APIs. But you can still get them, and you can still play around with them. And you can do that with reviews and Google My Business APIs. And that gives, a startup company like Podium, who was not touched by Google yet, the ability to play around with these API codes and go like, hey, okay, we made something that really auto posts and is cool and works properly. And Google said, yeah, you did. And that's awesome. And let's play ball a little bit more with that, whereas Facebook is like, we're taking all of this. Like
yeah, we're not. Yeah.
Yeah.
What didn't they hold Instagram's API as close to the chest as they possibly could up until like this year?
Well, they're actually restricting them even further now. It's actually a huge pain in the butt. Instagram's about to close off their public API access, I think almost entirely. So it'll only be the ability that we'll have is just using embeds, which again, it's unnecessary. It's a strategy to take, but I don't think it's one that's going to benefit anybody.
So why do they think it's going to benefit? Like, do you know anything? Like, what do you think Facebook's idea is behind kind of trying to make this like a closed system? Like even to the point of us not even being able to utilize connections between the platforms to help like better the usage of their platforms?
I think to a degree, when you're looking at like Google My Business and reviews, you have a much more public kind of standing profile in a way to where that's a business for all intents and purposes. Whereas Instagram, you can have personal accounts attached to it, and a lot of people do. And, a lot of people also don't know what they're doing on social media. So they have no idea that their public feed is public, and that anybody can get any URL and put it on anything. So I think they're saying, oh, we're doing this as a security measure to help people not be able to kind of, use content that isn't theirs, or for our content to be viewed on other platforms where they're not seeing our ad dollars, I think is the bigger piece of it. So, they can say it's kind of for different measures, but overall, they're just trying to restrict the content that you're going to be seeing on Instagram as much to the Instagram platform as possible, so that you have to scroll and you have to see targeted ads.
It's just a branding move. This all comes down to whatever each of these platforms believe is going to build the brand that they want to show to the public, or ultimately build a brand that's going to survive, right? So I mean, and that might have been kind of what you were getting at earlier with the question, but it's just it's that each of them is trying to build their own unique brand that is going to make them successful into the future. However, they are looking into the future and saying, this is how we need to look, and this is how we need to be, and this is the level of control we need to have. So yeah, from the standpoint, of an agency that looks at pretty much every business that we come across from a standpoint of where is their brand, what is their value proposition, what are their goals, and like how do they want to grow to be relevant throughout the next however long they plan on being in business. It is interesting to look at it from through the lens of the brand, and not just the lens of the lawsuits and what the news is saying, but like what parts. It's interesting because we're always talking about how do brands grow, how do brands become what they are, what are the new trends, and how brands are growing. And that's ultimately what all of these three big tech giants are doing. They still are trying to be as brand focused as they can.
Yeah, it's how do we get what we need from the capitalist side point of view? How do we manipulate it, but at the same time reassure people to build our brand identity? There's a reason everybody still wears Nikes, even though it's just common knowledge that they just use children to make those shoes in Southeast Asia. And it's like, Yes, they've gotten better with that, but it's still happening. They're
Yeah.
being linked to concentration camps in China. Like, it's happening. So, but do you think about that when you're going out and buying shoes? Like, no, and it doesn't make anybody a bad person. It's just how strong branding is. It's
Yeah.
like that's the
Well,
psychological effect that
and
good branding has. It
it's
helps
also
us overlook what capitalism requires.
and it's the Wonder Bread effect that I keep talking about, that I keep bringing
Mm-hmm.
up. If everybody knows how bad Nike's practices are and they make one little move to make it better, then everyone is all of a sudden more willing to, again, it's a branding move, and all of a sudden people are more willing to buy the shoes, even though Nike created the problem to begin with. For
Yeah.
everyone that does not listen to my rants on a daily basis, the Wonder Bread effect, when Wonder Bread came out, it was basically that they previously to Wonder Bread, they'd taken all of the nutrients out of white bread so that they could mass produce it. And then Wonder Bread comes along and then puts the nutrients back into the bread that should have already been in there. And so they tripled the processes instead of just making normal bread. And they said, look at us, we're awesome. And everybody bought it. So it's that same sort of thing. Is it's as soon as a brand is willing to come along and fix a problem that they created, that builds the brand, because people have short memories, and people are willing to jump off
People
on.
want to believe.
Yeah.
They want to believe if it's going to make their life easier, if it's going to convenience them, if it's going to help them fit into society, they want to believe. Like, you just need to give them a little bit and be like, no. We closed the child sweatshops. They're just sweatshops now.
They're just
and like
sweatshops.
we're installing fans.
You want to feel like you're
and then
being
you're like,
part of the
oh,
solution.
okay.
Yeah, you want to feel like you're
well,
part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And it helps you go out and buy a shoe with a clean conscience if you feel like you're part of that solution.
yeah, or it just gives you enough to like turn on the cognitive dissonance and be like, all right, let's compartmentalize that. And here we go, and it's shocking how effective it can be. We look at Facebook, we know what Facebook's done. Like, I think about that kind of regularly. Like, how often do we get emails from like some random company like Pinterest or something? And it's just like, oh, we had a data breach. Like, sorry about you. Like, all your passwords and like all this stuff was just like compromised. And I'm like, that happens on average for me, somebody who signs up for a bunch of junk on the internet. I would say probably once every 6 months, I get like a compromise happen. And like, that is an insanely high standard of data breaches to be like living in. But again, it's so easy to look past it if I just get an email and they're like, hey, these are the measures that we're taking. Don't worry about it. And it's
We
like,
owned up to it. Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, wow, the bridge to kind of giving somebody peace of mind is always lessening.
Bill Burr was on Seth Meyers' show recently. I just saw the clip today, but he was talking about how there's all this outrage about the dropping the gender of the potato head doll. And he's like, the real outrage should be the fact that it's still made out of plastic. He's like, this thing's gonna be around for like 1,000 years, and we're all worried about its gender identity. And I was like, that's hilarious.
It's moving the target. It's giving somebody something to fight over so that they don't see the issue that should be maybe more clearly in front of you to be addressed.
And it's great. That's really an interesting thing when you look at how brands evolve over time. It's okay. It's what are you kind of using as a distraction to do behind your back? Like, what overall is that goal? And it's funny to see, we're seeing it in real time with the privacy debates of, okay, how do we get people focused on something while we need to do what we need to take care of to exist as, an entity that is primary function is making money for stakeholders. And that's where, a lot of people can become jaded when you look at like social good campaigns and stuff like that, or how like Coca-Cola does like, they're like little marketing campaigns where they're like, we supplied water to X, Y, thousands of countries. But it creates this interesting idea of how brands do become almost living entities where they need to humanize themselves. They need to be relatable to a person. And even though something like Coke, its primary function is to sell like a drink that is bad for your health to the public, but it's like, when you look at Coke, you kind of get a warm, fuzzy feeling because you think Santa, polar bears, helping people in other countries and things like that.
Well, we gave diabetes to however many people, doesn't sell as well. So I guess you're right.
Yeah, right.
we also branded mineral water. We also own, oh my gosh, like the number of companies that like that Coca-Cola owns, and you're just looking at it like, why? Is so funny. But yeah, no, you're right. That's a great example. So like that's how all of these large multinational companies are kind of choosing, I guess, to push their brand forward. What are some ways that I guess for anyone listening who's more in the small business sector, for businesses that are looking to grow their brand, not to the detriment of their target audience, what are some ways what is some advice that we can give listeners, clients, just people in general, about ethical ways to build that brand?
I think, what it was actually one of our new employees here at GriffinWink brought up. Her name is Summer, who is, what's her official title?
She's a brand strategist.
Brand strategist. Very good. She was talking about something, we were talking just with her about different things that she's worked on. And she really talked about emotion and how, like, what's the emotion that the person who needs your company's services, what emotion are they primarily going to feel when they start seeking you out? If you're roadside assistance, obviously that emotion is going to be super high. You're not searching roadside assistance unless you have a blowout. So you need to kind of meet them with blues. You look at insurance companies, Allstate, Progressive, all those guys, blues, calming. If you need something that's higher priority, if you want it fast and easy, McDonald's, red, quick, speedy. But go beyond the colors and really think of how can you meet the customer where they're at when they're seeking you out, and what information, what's the first thing that you would say to them if you could, and really think about that when you're putting together what your brand looks like, is what I would say is kind of like a good starting point for discussion.
And to going off of that, maybe this is something that I think I've talked with people a lot about, but the discrepancy between who you believe your target is and who your target actually is, truly seeking to understand not only what these people are feeling, but who they are in the first place. Many people enter the business space with a specific set of knowledge that allows them to provide this service. And through becoming a professional in that area, they have built up this idea of what their profession and service is to them. And then they build their target audience off of that, where in reality, because you are so entangled within what you do, it is very likely completely different than how you view it. And figuring out how or who these people are truly, not just who you think they are. And then when that happens, figuring out what they're actually saying and thinking and needing and feeling, but making sure that there's that sense of purpose behind figuring out who your target audience is and what they want, rather than just saying, because I am a professional in this area, I know my profession well enough to know what people need from my profession. So I think that's another important part of it.
Yeah, we spoke about it in one of our meetings yesterday, how we're going to start really focusing on building personas for our clients. And so it's just finding out who those customers are, those different ideal clients for each of our clients' customers, and really trying to figure out how to find them where they're at, and show them that our clients can provide the service that they're needing in that moment.
Yeah. And having a conversation about personas, you say, well, who do you think, the so-and-so mechanic, who do you think your target audience is? And he might say, well, it's Bob, who's 55 years old, and he needs to replace this part on his car. And you're like, no, actually that's you. Like, you're describing you, like, and so, building out, and that's a really important exercise that I think we want to be encouraging clients to do is to work very intentionally to figure out who those personas are, all the way down to like all the way down to the profession, how many kids they have, where they live, what they do on the weekends. Like it seems weird, and it seems kind of like this weird like improv exercise, right? But it's what is going to allow businesses, again, that aren't just kind of these global businesses. We're talking about the businesses we interact with every day, mom and pop shops, local businesses, even some businesses that are larger, maybe reasonable. That is maybe the most important thing you can do to get started, is figuring out who that persona is, and then how you can interact with them, like Eric said, emotionally, even all the way down to, like the color of the font and the font that you're using on the ad can have emotional implications, but it's only going to work if you've figured out who that person is and what they actually want from you.
And you gotta walk this tightrope of being specific, but also being broad at the same. Like you kind of gotta do both. Like you want to be specific in these characteristics, but you still want it to be able to fit a large number of people who will be the potential customers. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, did anyone have anything else? Yeah.
No.
Well, one thing I was thinking of is, we were kind of talking about doing all, these different, these companies now, these different brands doing these, like, I don't know, like more socially aware things as well.
Yeah.
And I do think it's gotten overload at this point, to where, now it's like, does every company or whatever really need to take a stand on this issue? And especially now, it seems like there's tons of issues constantly coming up.
Just choose an issue. Yeah, choose whatever issue you want to make the ad on, and be 100% behind that issue.
Yeah, and
I think
it's authenticity, too. But
yeah,
I just don't. There's certain companies, like, knowing your, like, I just, like, during Pride Month, not every company needs a rainbow version of all their products and every, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes if that is
it thing, becomes
like,
pandering.
Yeah, exactly.
It loses appeal when everybody's doing it, to the point of where it becomes weird,
And people know when that happens. Like, was it Pepsi that did the Kendall Jenner ad?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Like, that was so obviously, blatantly, poorly written pandering.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't even
I remember, like, after the insurrection on January 6th, I got an email from Juul, the nicotine vapes, telling me that their stance on our democracy and republic, and I was like, whoo!
I thought you meant the country music artist. But
I was gonna say, thank God, Juul nicotine device got into my inbox to let me know that they do not stand for the insurrectionists and want our republic to further. I was like, this is the most dystopian thing to happen to me in my 29 years. But it's like, I agree with you. It's like, I understand if you have an audience, and if it's a cause that's like really in your heart, and you believe in it fully, like, absolutely, rebrand it. But it does get to a point of pandering where it becomes less about who you're actually celebrating. If you're just changing your rainbow logo, it's not about, celebrating the LGBTQIA community. It's about making money and seeming cool. And it's like, that's where it falls apart. But with social media and the reach people have, they feel this need to, because unfortunately, if they don't, they'll get called out on it. So it's like, there's a lot of really interesting kind of dynamics of how you have to navigate as a brand to seem authentic, not pandering, but also not, lame, or you're missing out on something that everybody else is doing, because now
apathetic. Like, you're not, wait, why aren't you an activist for this? Or why aren't it's a weird line to toe.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to act like it's easy. I just know it's just gotten, like, way, like you said, the Juul thing is the perfect example. Like, it's just getting way out of hand, where, like, we don't need to know every company's stance on everything. And honestly, it's detrimental to those companies. Like, I wasn't sitting here curious what most of these companies were stance were on these things. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, I'm forced, like, what if you're now potentially alienating clients for no real reason, because it's something no one really cared about.
Yeah.
At the same time, and it's not even relevant to what you're selling. So it is tricky. but
Yeah,
you
you're
know,
just
I think it's just
jumping
this
up.
whole new world we're still trying to figure out with all that. But
Jumping up in the back of the
It's
classroom.
true.
Me. I hate violence. I hate violence. I love
And
love. I hate violence.
more than anything, like you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Trace. Like what happened in the summer of 2020 protests and just kind of what that socially did, you know, in combination with a global pandemic happening simultaneously, and just kind of what kind of came into like the public, you know, the Jungian shared consciousness at that time was, it was a lot to process, you know, and brands are still trying to figure out kind of what, you know, the future looks like and how socially aware and involved that they need to be and what the responsible level is and what level is too much or not enough. And, you know, we're all trying to do that in a way. And it's really, it's important to remember that. I think, I remember it was the New York Times who said we're technically living in what's called a cool period, which is times that are notoriously really cool to learn about as history. Like we would probably refer to like World War II as really cool, but they're notoriously awful to actually live through. And I'm not saying anything about that, but it is, you know, there's so much change happening at such a quick pace, socially, politically, you know, just on so many different levels that it's, you know, it's going to be interesting to see as the dust starts to settle and as we kind of start to see what the future looks like. Is we're heading into unknown territory still. And it's fascinating that we get to live through it and see how brands try to process through it too.
And you can't just throw your hand up in the back of the classroom and cry out the next piece of activism that comes your way. You have to, if you are going to be intentional about building your brand, finding your niche, meeting your target audience where they are emotionally and meeting their needs as a business, you have to sit down and figure out where you stand on these issues. Sure, it's hard work to figure out and it's a tough line to toe, but you have to figure out where you stand. At the very least, to continue to be relevant, and in the very best case scenario, become committed to fighting for that cause that you have decided that your company can help further. And yeah, that's hard. And I think we've seen a lot of businesses get raked through the coals for not taking that kind of time to sit down and figure that out. And you will have more businesses that shutter their doors because of it. But the businesses and the brands that emerge out of this period to have stories told about them later on are going to be the ones that have that conversation and do it intentionally.
And to circle back
just one more thing on that moment. Just also, if you're doing this, you need to have an internal look of your own company and make sure that if you're going to be outwardly expressing that you have these values, you need to make sure that inwardly you have the, like, if you're like, for example, if you're wanting to support, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement or something like that, make sure you actually are employing people of color within your company, or you know, I can't think of any more examples off my head.
If you're gonna champion, you know, like women's rights and the women's march, make sure you have women in upper management of your company. Exactly. It's just like, it is. It's easy to put it all out, but make sure you're walking the walk as well as talking the talk, because that's what's most important in these movements, you know.
Yeah, because people, that's what a lot of times, especially these bigger companies, they get scrutinized on that real quick. Look that information up on any public, you know, traded company or anything like that. So
yeah, and it's interesting, you know, we were talking about large scale brands kind of again there, and it's like how does the small scale brand, you know, navigate these things? And you have to know your target audience too, you know. You have to know who you're really serving and where you're located and what people and your customers' expectations of you are, you know. Whereas in a place like Lubbock, Texas, like making sure you have like a solid celebration of like Independence Day, or like, you know, kind of representing some sort of sentiment in that value always goes a long way. You know, people love that. It's a patriotic town. There's a lot of active service members in this town as well, you know, and their families. So giving that, is important for this audience, whereas in other places that just might not be the case. So it's like always good to keep in mind of saying like, okay, what are the expectations my customers have to me? Not just trying to follow what the biggest brands are doing. It's, hyper localize your idea. Don't just think about your audience, but then also, the potential their audiences too. How are you gonna draw in new people as well as retain as what you got?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. I feel like that was the last few minutes has just kind of been a great wrap up to let me break the fourth wall here and say how shocked I am that all of that went so well together. Like going from a discussion of large, huge monopolies all the way down to branding across the world, to branding on a local level, to
none of this was planned at all.
Guys,
like
we're awesome. We were awesome this man. Yeah.
Before we went live, we were like, I don't know, does anybody know what we're gonna do? And then like, you're right. So let's just be honest and upfront, because that was pretty cool.
In conclusion, we're great, and Facebook, stop whining and figure yourself out.
Those are the spark notes of it.
There you go.
I like it.
And know your brand. Thanks guys for jumping on and for sharing your input. Thank you everyone for listening. We appreciate you all. Again, live on Facebook Live and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Mountain, and next day audio only on wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for dropping by the break room, and we'll see you all next week.